let's go ahead and throw it down over to the stage now to see the players and a detailed look at their team. So Stefan running with the Ogre Pawn with the Wellspring Mask, Golden Go, Landorus Incarnate, Tornadus Incarnate, Incineroar, and that Clefairy that we talked about. Tim running, yeah, it's the same 6, maybe some tweaks. We don't know. He knows. Raging Bolt, Rillaboom, Hearth Flame Mask, Ogre Pawn, Incineroar, Urshifu, and Fluttermane.
Yeah, and so immediately you're looking at 2 teams that both have a boosting special attacker kind of at their core with support around it. Stefan's got the Nasty Plot Golden Go with the Clefairy to support it, of course, versus the Raging Bolt with all of those support options on the other side. The Clefairy is going to be pretty important in this match, I think, if you want to contain the Raging Bolt. And the Raging Bolt may be difficult to contain because if you're pressing the offense with Golden Go, that's difficult into Raging Bolt. We've seen some of them opt for Dazzling Gleam, so you have a damaging option before the Raging Bolt terastallizes. That's not here. Just Shadow Ball is the option for Stefan. But he does have other damage threats into the Raging Bolt as well, like the Landorus, that can really do a ton of damage with Earth Power if he's able to get it in and fighting against Raging Bolt before it terastallizes. Of course, that can be hard to do. That's the thing about these Raging Bolt teams is you see the window. You think you're going to land an Earth Power at some point, but one fake out after the next keeps disrupting that offense, and that's what Rillaboom and Incineroar are here to do. That's what the Urshifu Rapid Strike can do to try to put pressure back onto Landorus and all of these other threats on Stefan's side. The Golden Go does not really want to take a Surging Strikes while it's trying to set up. The Incineroar does not want to try to take a Surging Strike, so it's the kind of tool that you can use to punch a hole in one of these defensive teams. I think both players are going to be looking for that first KO, try to like open up this game somehow.
Yep, and you saw previously that Stefan was the 2022 Indianapolis Regional Champion. Tim here keeping the momentum up after Underdog EUIC Finals appearance, and that was a run. That was an amazing run, like watching him play versus Alex Gomez in the top 4, seeing that maneuvering of the rotations of like the Rillaboom and the Incineroar, just be able to make sure that my Raging Bolt can keep up with Alex's Raging Bolt's Calm Minds, just making sure that, you know, if you're going to call mine, I'm going to call mine. So it's going to be interesting. Like, it's about that cycling, right, that you mentioned. It's going to be about that cycling of Rillaboom, Incineroar, just to make sure that the Raging Bolt over on Tim's side will be able to set up.
Yeah, I think it should be a really fascinating match to watch. I think it's going to be a match that plays at a pretty slow pace. You're going to be looking for little incremental positional advantages that lead to little incremental damage or resource advantages that slowly build on themselves. Or one of these Pokemon gets caught unexpectedly. You know, the Golden Go or the Raging Bolt could just take a ton of damage out of nowhere and really put a hole in one of these teams. And things can develop so fast after what has been a pretty slow match up to that point.
Yeah, and like you said, you know, Clefairy is a choice, right? Like the Friend Guard will give different numbers. It kind of disrupts the calcs that you already know based on what you've built your team to be about. And then also that redirection is really annoying. You and I talked about it before, how Clefairy can kind of wall Raging Bolt.
Yeah, the Clefairy can just wall Raging Bolt, and like you mentioned, the Bolt can be really helpful. You look at a Pokemon like Landorus that can often try to break the core of Rillaboom and Incineroar, but it still has to watch out. It doesn't want to take a knockoff and then a Wood Hammer or something that just breaks through it. But those look a little bit easier if you're a Friend Guard to help, and then even a little bit easier if you can spend the time Follow Meing to support. I wouldn't be surprised to see Landorus and Clefairy up against each other trying to break that core, but I think it's going to be a really interesting balance of whether Seven tries to kind of focus on breaking that core next to Clefairy, or focus on having Golden Go next to Clefairy to boost and try to keep up with Raging Bolt if it's itself on the field boosting. I think both players are going to have that little bit of push and pull where it's going to be hard to both have the damage and the support and the boosting all at the same field at the same time.
Yep, and 2 friends enter this battle. One friend will make it to day 2. Of course, the other friend will also have another shot to make it to day 2 with Swiss Round 9. Both players have selected their teams, and we're getting ready to get underway here with Swiss Round 8. Tim leading with Urshifu and Incineroar, while Stefan will lead with Ogre Pawn and Tornadus.
Yeah, this looks to be a pretty strong lead for Stefan. Finds the Tornadus in against the Urshifu on the other side is able to either threaten Bleakwinds immediately or give a speed advantage to the team. Ogrepon doesn't really like the Intimidate, but otherwise doesn't mind being in this position. You kind of like to be against the Urshifu on the other side. It makes it very unsafe to click Surging Strikes, but then you also have the Ivy Cudgel threat back into Incineroar, kind of backfoots both of these Pokemon. If one of your Pokemon is backfoot with one of these teams that is so capable of cycling, it's pretty easy to cycle out of that position. But if you're worried about both of them at the same time, that's the kind of small incremental advantage that can open up a hole.
Yeah, so Stefan now trying to decide what the best course of action is, and it looks like the battle was canceled. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to get an explanation on what was happening there. Players will exit back out of the match.
Yeah, so interesting leads. Looks like there's going to be some talk about what is going on with the judges as we, try to figure out what exactly was the issue there. So it wasn't a run. It wasn't like Stefan saw the leads and was like, nope, not this game. Not this game.
Sometimes there are matches that feel like that. I don't think that this lead was one of those, so we'll have to see what's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, those were leads.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that neither player had their boosting core of the team on the field immediately. No Golden Goes or Raging Bolts to be spied. You'd have to imagine Clefairy was still in the back somewhere. It seems like it's really important to this matchup, but you can't take anything for granted. I think every Pokemon on both of these teams could have an impact on this match, and so you can also kind of make someone keep preparing, keep hoping, thinking they have to eventually deal with X or Y Pokemon. There's eventually going to be a Raging Bolt or a Clefairy that has to dealt with, and then not even bring it, so that you just have a different set of threats. And so I think it's going to be a really interesting knowledge game within this match of what point all 4 Pokemon are revealed.
Yeah, so looks like there are some technical difficulties going on the stage right now. So I guess the question now is, were both players happy with their leads, or do you think some adjustments will be made?
Yeah, I think whether or not both players were happy, I think there'd be adjustments made. You can't just lead the same thing and hope to get the same output on the other side, even if you were happy with it. I do imagine it was in Stefan's advantage. I think the Urshifu was not in a great position there. This one does not have U-turn, so can't try to just get some damage and come off the field. Also, would have been worried about just getting outsped either naturally, because Urshifu also not holding a Choice Scarf, and so naturally slower than both the Tornadus and the Ogrepon on the other side, but also because of the Tailwind, and so I think it was in a pretty difficult position.
Yeah, so yep, adjustments are probably gonna have to be made unless both players agree to just unless both players agree to just lead the same thing. Just the only information that's been revealed has been the lead so far.
Yeah, and like you say, they don't know what Pokemon are in the back behind that, and they won't be having to bring the same Pokemon. They'll be free to make new choices.
Yeah. As somebody that has used this team to great success at the European International Championships, Stefan probably knows a lot about this team, especially since they're friends too, right? So I think that I wonder if it comes down to whether or not Tim has to do something different, because if they're friends, they probably practice together. And then if they practice together, then they probably know each other's tendencies. And then I wonder if it's like, well, I know what you're going to do here. And then it becomes this weird mind game between two friends.
Yeah, you heard Justin describing the match in that way about his and Wolf, that because they had practiced together, they knew details about the roles and what plays were available to each other at each position. Both of these players may be in a similar situation here, but you also have to imagine, even if not practice against Tim using this team, Stefan's played against this 6 plenty. Anyone playing VGC at a high level over the last month will have played against those 6 Pokemon a good amount. And so you have to imagine Stefan has an idea of the game plan that he's after, and Tim will have to try to disrupt that.
Yeah, and the name of the game, I believe, for Stefan will be make sure that the Raging Bolt cannot just sit there and calm mind. You always want to have an offensive presence in order to be able to make sure that the Raging Bolt does not sit safely. Be able to deal with, again, one of the great things about this balanced team with the Raging Bolt, with Incineroar, with Rillaboom, just how you can easily cycle those Intimidates, you can easily cycle those Fake Outs, you can easily cycle those Parting Shots. You just have to be able to deal with that and make sure that you have a big offensive threat over on Stefan's side, which is presented with the, as you said, the Golden Go, the Landers. Landers is a very strong option too. It goes back to during the Open when we had that conversation about, you know, Landers versus Raging Bolt. They both had high usage at the European International Championships, and well, Landers kind of will be able to attack really heavily into Raging Bolt, so long as Raging Bolt cannot get those Calm Minds off.
Yeah, you have to wonder if maybe that's where Tim was trying to be one step ahead and had Urshifu out in the lead, because if you think Landorus is likely to try to immediately be on the field to put pressure onto the Raging Bolt, keep it from ever setting up, then you'd of course love to have your Urshifu also on the field to fight against that and put pressure. That's the kind of little bit of rock, paper, scissors, a little bit of push and pull that happens in these lead matchups, where you're always kind of hoping for one specific set of Pokemon on the other side when you lock in your two.
Yeah. So, Stefan knows this team. Stefan knows they're friends. They know how each other play. So, it's about how... I bet the Raging Bolt's in the back. I bet the Landers is in the back, right? Just because that's the kind of end game that you want. You want the Raging Bolt to kind of want to fish out for the Landers, knock out the Landers, if you're Tim, at least, and then get that Raging Bolt in. If you're Stefan, you want to see where that Raging Bolt is, and then challenge that Raging Bolt once it finally hits the field.
It is interesting because it can be pretty hard to use the Raging Bolt as a win condition because of the way Clefairy disrupts it. We talked about this in the Open, but if you're using Follow Me with a Fairy type, then Raging Bolt cannot do damage on that turn. It's either going to have a Dragon Pulse redirected for an immunity into the Fairy type, or have a Thunderclap redirected into a Pokemon that uses Follow Me, not a damaging attack that turn, and so it also won't do damage. And so you may want that, Raging Bolt may look appetizing as a win condition because it plays against a bunch of Stefan's Pokemon really well. Things like Ogerpon can't put enough pressure on it. Golden Go, if it hasn't had to Terastallize, and you have a Calm Mind boost, it's really hard to break through that with Make It Rain and Shadow Ball, but you can't really play for an end game there, because if too many Pokemon on Tim's side go down, so the Raging Bolt is left by itself or with too little damage output next to it to break through Clefairy, you know, if you just have an Incineroar that doesn't even have Flare Blitz, then you're not going to break through Clefairy with Incineroar either. So it can be a dangerous game to go for a Raging Bolt win condition, because in a moment it can become, well, I would eventually beat this Golden Go if they had to fight each other, but because Clefairy is there, it's just going to get to Shadow Ball until eventually it wins this game.
Yep. Both players will restart game one. It will start 0-0, so it's like nothing happened. They're just going to restart game one as they jump back into Swiss Round 8. So I just want to update everybody as to what's going on. 0-0, restart game one. So that's the state that we're at, Len.
Yeah, so just a clean start to the match. It's like that game one didn't happen. Both players will a little bit have it on their mind what Pokemon get led. It's like an extra
mind game.
Extra mind game, yeah. About what the options are, what your opponent's mindset is about how to approach the game. But we will get a clean start.
And also, like, you know, you see the leads, and then you think to yourself, well, what was in the back? Do I have stuff in the back that can deal with these two leads, right? So back to it. Players are on the stage getting ready to jump into team preview here in game one of Swiss Round 8. Again, for those of you just tuning in, the winner of this round secures their spot in day 2 here at the Orlando Regional Championships. The loser doesn't make it to day 2 just yet, because then they'll drop to 6-2 and then have an opportunity in Swiss Round 9 to make it to 7-2. Math.
You're getting the hang of it.
Get the hang of it, Len. Quick team preview here. The Pokemon on Stefan's side of the field, again, the Ogerpon with the Wellspring Mask, Golden Go, Landorus, Tornadus, Incineroar, Clefairy. Over on Tim's side, the team that he had piloted to be a finalist at the European International Championships, Raging Bolt. Importantly, this is a Raging Bolt that carries a leftovers item. Rillaboom, Hearthflame Mask, Ogerpon, Incineroar, Urshifu, and Fluttermane.
There's an interesting detail about the Fluttermane as well. It does not have Shadow Ball, which a lot of Fluttermane have been getting a little bit more creative about what moves they have to try to fit things like Substitute and Icy Wind. In this case, it is Icy Wind and Taunt. And Shadow Ball doesn't have a lot of things it's trying to find. Moonblast really is your main damage output, but as soon as you see a Golden Go on the other side, you're probably wishing a little bit that you had that Shadow Ball, because it'd be another great way to pressure that Golden Go. But without it, Fluttermane doesn't really have that much damage output. You, of course, can't use Taunt to stop nasty plots either, because of the good as gold. You can use Icy Wind to try to drop down the Golden Go speed, make it a little bit more vulnerable to Incineroar, but otherwise, a Fluttermane versus Golden Go matchup, instead of being in Tim's favor, actually becomes kind of largely in Stefan's favor.
Both players now have made their selection here in Game 1 of Swiss Round 8 as we get ready to show the leads here. Again, Stefan Mott versus Tim Edwards. Tim changing it up, leading with Raging Bolt and Incineroar, while Stefan will stick around with Ogerpon and Incineroar.
Yeah, and so now Incineroar on the field for Stefan. No Tornadus up against this Raging Bolt, but Raging Bolt does find itself up against the Ogerpon and immediately on the field, looking a little bit more comfortable to start trying to boost up. Not really threatened too much by either of these Pokemon. Of course, doesn't really want to take a knockoff and lose its leftovers. Doesn't really want to get Parting Shot and have that first boost undone, and Fake Out could just disrupt it this turn, but nothing is immediately putting damage pressure on it. It's going to be comfortable to sit on the field and start doing its work, but just because it's comfortable doesn't mean there aren't plays available for Tim to try to get out of that position, because Raging Bolt will always be able to find some future comfortable position.
Yeah, and the nice thing about Leftovers Raging Bolt is just how much damage it can heal back up after taking some damage, so you don't want to lose that Leftovers just yet. Stefan's Ogerpon will Terrasilize, will get the Embody aspect and boost its special defense, which will be able to deal with Raging Bolt's attacks a little better, as Incineroar on Stefan's side will go for a Fake Out into the Incineroar on Tim's side. Incineroar not being able to retaliate, and here's an Ogerpon Swords Dance, so trying to boost up its attack stat by 2 stages, trying to deal some damage out onto this Raging Bolt that is going to be more specially defensive because of that Calm Mind.
Yeah, so both sides just get their first boost off. Fake Out into Incineroar. The Incineroars just kind of look at each other for the turn and let one Calm Mind go up on the Raging Bolt and one Swords Dance on the Ogerpon. Ogerpon kind of commits Terastallization very aggressively there, so that must be a clear part of Stefan's plan, but there wasn't that much need for it on that turn. Unlikely to really need the special defense boost. We know what this Raging Bolt is out here to do for the first few turns, and get those Calm Minds, but it means this Incineroar is immediately looking pretty vulnerable. Of course, there's probably a Rillaboom there that Incineroar may just be looking like an Incineroar for a moment, but at +2 and Terastallization boosted, even Rillaboom doesn't really want to take an Ivy Cudgel on this switch-in.
And Tim switches out Incineroar. It will be the Rillaboom, so Stefan calling that. Going to be crashing into that slot with a Flare Blitz from the Incineroar. The Grassy Surge will take effect, Grassy Terrain will cover the battlefield, and that's going to be important to the longevity of the Raging Bolt on Tim's side. Ogerpon uses Ivy Cudgel here, connects into that Rillaboom slot, does 50% damage to it. Here's Raging Bolt using Dragon Pulse, but thanks to that Embody aspect, does about 50%. Incineroar now crashes into that slot and picks up the KO on Rillaboom, so a pivot piece from Tim's team has been knocked out. Really kind of a telegraphed switch right there, right?
Well, it was a really nice pin from Stefan, right? Yeah. Like, even if Incineroar stays in, it obviously goes down to Ivy Cudgel. If you look across the 6 possible Pokemon for Tim, probably nothing could take that Flare Blitz plus Ivy Cudgel double up. And that's the kind of guaranteed hole that you really want to place in one of these teams. That's one of the Fake Out Pokemon gone. The cycling is going to get a lot more difficult. It doesn't really pay that high of a cost for it. It loses about half the health on the Ogerpon. But the Raging Bolt, we talked a second ago that if it is left on an island, left at the end of the game, and there's a Clefairy hiding in the back for Stefan, then it's going to be very difficult for Tim to actually find win conditions. And so getting that first hole down, that makes it a little bit easier to get the second KO and start to kind of cascade these knockouts that simplify the game state. I don't think that's in Tim's favor, and I think this is a pretty strong start for Stefan. But Urshifu loves to find a free entry onto the field, gets out here with its Focus Sash intact, is threatening both of these Pokemon. Ogerpon might be low enough to just go down to a close combat of its own, and of course Incineroar doesn't want to take anything from this Urshifu.
No close combat for me, no Aqua Jet, no Surging Strikes at all. But one of the nice things about Incineroar is that even if you switch it out, you know, having access to that Intimidate will kind of matter for the Incineroar over on Tim's side. Not going to matter too much against this Urshifu or the Raging Bolt. So, you know, Tim really thought that turn through about what was needed to be sent in, as Stefan going to retreat the Ogerpon with 2 stages of increased attack. So, 1 stage of increased attack, actually, because of the Intimidate from early on. Clefairy takes field here, so Clefairy, a very important Pokemon in this matchup, takes this close combat so well.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really smart switch from Stefan. It looked like that was almost a pin on the Ogerpon. If you're really committed to having the Ogerpon on the field, then it is a pin. Even if you bring Clefairy into the other slot to make sure that you can take close combat, if you're attacking that turn, then you're going to go down to a Thunderclap. But just recognizing Ogerpon was in a vulnerable position, even with the boost, couldn't stay on the field. And so really safely gets Clefairy in there, keeps Ogerpon for later on in the match, and then also manages to get the parting shot to get Incineroar out and just reset this position into the Landorus next to Clefairy position that we talked about before the match. Can be really difficult for Tim to deal with. This Landorus is going to be able to pump out a ton of damage. Raging Bolt at the moment, if Follow Me is clicked by Clefairy, offers no damage at all, and Landorus is able to go after Urshifu. Now, Tim may not hate a Surging Strikes into Follow Me trade, right? If you can get rid of Clefairy, then suddenly this looks very different. Raging Bolt looks like it's about to take over the match, even down a Pokemon. And Urshifu has the Focus Sash, that means it can at least get through 1 turn and get one of those attacks off. But it would be a really volatile trade. Both players would be giving something of like incredible value, the health bar of this Clefairy versus the health bar of this Urshifu. So either one of them could opt out of it. I think it'll be really interesting to see how they approach it if either player just doesn't want to make that trade.
Yeah, and Clefairy, bulky Pokemon with that Eviolite, but it does not want to take that many Surging Strikes at all.
But Surging Strikes may also be the only real way to get through. We talked about that Incineroar does not have Flare Blitz, and is going to be trying to knock it off. The Raging Bolt can never get to Clefairy at all, and so Tim just commits this Water Terrestrialization, takes an Earth Power that will actually take it all the way down to the Focus Sash, but that's because this is the window. This is the one chance to try to really get a lot of damage into the Clefairy.
There's no Follow Me, I believe, as Urshifu uses Surging Strikes, and that just lands straight into that Landorus here. Big damage, and it will be enough for the KO.
This could be enormous. If this is Moonblast coming out from the Clefairy to confirm this KO, well, then how do you ever deal with Clefairy?
Yeah, so Clefairy not opting to go for a Follow Me here. Stefan sending in that Landorus, just a very juicy target for that Urshifu here, as Raging Bolt content to go for a Calm Mind, as Clefairy does double up into that Urshifu slot and picks up the KO on that Terrestrialized Urshifu. So a big threat to try to break through the Clefairy, gone.
Yeah, I think it's just a really smart play from Stefan to recognize that, yes, Clefairy could be used to protect Landorus and keep Landorus on the field, but that means Urshifu would have the chance to protect itself. I think that's probably still a winning path for this game. You can probably try to eventually land the Earth Power onto Incineroar as well, but just saying, actually, Landorus is not the most critical thing here. Getting rid of Urshifu before it can land 2 Surging Strikes. That could have still been 1 Surging Strikes into Clefairy that turn, but before it could land 2 Surging Strikes onto Clefairy means that I'm going to probably win this game. It's looking very difficult for Tim to find the right damage. He will try. There will be plenty of damage coming out, but the grassy terrain means that it's going to be slow going, and meanwhile that Incineroar on the other side will probably start getting targeted down by Ivy Cudgels.
Yeah, so the final 2 Pokemon on Tim's side of the field, going to be that Raging Bolt, going to be that Incineroar that does not have Flare Blitz. So if it does hit into that Clefairy, it'll have to be a knockoff to knock off the Eviolite, and then after that...
This is one kind of open turn for Tim. This is the one chance he's going to get to have to fake out a Clefairy on the other side. But no, it just...
it just gets faked out instead.
Yeah, but I think Stefan makes a really smart play here, because if you were too aggressive in trying to get... Ooh, it just sings it to really turn off the damage coming in the other side. If you got too aggressive here and it tried to just immediately switch the Incineroar into Ogerpon to create that situation, that it could have been a fake out into Clefairy and a Dragon Pulse that tried to get rid of the Ogerpon. Now with Incineroar asleep on the other side, and no fake out ever going to be available for Tim, again, it looks a lot more like that Follow Me is just going to be enough to really ice out Tim's offense.
Yeah, so Clefairy now doing what Clefairy does best, gonna protect its friend. and just redirect all attacks. Raging Bolt still continuing to try to get as many Calm Mind boosts as possible as Incineroar on Stefan's side. Will Parting Shot away, targeting down the Incineroar on Tim's side. So this is a way to be able to get the Ogerpon in safely. Incineroar has to take a turn of sleep here, so Ogerpon comes in for free.
Yeah, Ogerpon comes in for free and is really free from here on out. I don't think -1 knockoffs are going to beat this Clefairy very fast at all. And that's really the only damage Tim has available to him now at this point in the game. As long as Follow Me is clicked every turn, Raging Bolt can't do damage. Incineroar can only use knockoff into a resisted Clefairy. It's kind of a checkmate situation.
Yep, and the grassy terrain will disappear from the field, so Raging Bolt will not... Well, I mean, I guess Raging Bolt hasn't really needed to take advantage of it yet because Stefan has just kind of ignored this Raging Bolt because of this Clefairy here becoming the center of attention. Raging Bolt will use Thunderclap, but again, redirected into that Clefairy fails immediately as Ogerpon just goes for an Ivy Cudgel here. Will target down the Incineroar, will be doing some big damage and gets the KO.
Yeah, and now there's no damage, right? I mean, the Incineroar, beyond the fact that it had so little damage output coming in, was facing down a faster water terrestrialized Ogerpon who was very happy to just Ivy Cudgel a sleeping Incineroar, and now it's just Follow Me and maybe Sword Stance to speed it up a little bit, or Tim can just run and end it. But it is just a checkmate situation because of the relationship between Clefairy and Raging Bolt. And that's going to be such an important part of this match because there is some path through this match where Tim wins a game off of Raging Bolt being the carry. But it has to involve keeping other Pokemon like Rillaboom and Urshifu that can actually do damage to Clefairy alive into the end game. He's got to have a Pokemon advantage that because Raging Bolt dealt some earlier damage, that means he's able to trade those Pokemon for Clefairy and then have Raging Bolt win the game. If it happens the other way, like it did in this game, where Stefan has the earlier offense, pushes the hole through the team with his Flare Blitz into Raging Bolt, and then the second hole through the team with the Earth Power plus Moonblast into Urshifu, then he will always win that because Clefairy just wins against Raging Bolt in the end game. I think it'll be really interesting to see whether Tim just decides that this is not a valid enough path through the game to try to create Raging Bolt win conditions, that it's going to be too difficult to get Clefairy off of the field early enough to not just get checkmated this way. And then what modes does that leave for the team? Because this is a team that is so focused on the Raging Bolt that doesn't mean there aren't other ways to play. He has an Ogerpon of his own that can deal a lot of damage. Of course, doesn't like beating up against Incineroar and some of these other Pokemon, but it might at least avoid that checkmate situation.
Yeah, so if Tim wants to maintain that Raging Bolt win condition that this team sometimes chases a lot, needs to preserve that offense. Like you said, that Clefairy just sticking around on the field, not going to be great. Like, you need something to be able to just go off on the offense, and there's options, right? There's so many different options, like not like the Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon can also be an option to try to chunk away at the Clefairy. You know, using the Terastallization there to get the Embody aspect and just hammering it away with an Ivy Cudgel or something like that.
Yeah, I think one way or another, the first KO is just so pivotal this match. It's that first block out of the wall that makes it start to collapse. And I think Stefan just did a really great job in that game one of identifying a way to create that. Getting the early Sword Stance never really allowed much risk to the Ogerpon with the special defense boost from turn one, and not clicking a damaging attack that turn. There was no real way for Raging Bolt to do a ton of damage into Ogerpon before it created this position where the Ivy Cudgel and the Flare Blitz were going into one slot, and that was going to be a KO.
Tim changing it up here, and so is Stefan. Urshifu and Rillaboom over on Tim's side of the field, Ogerpon and Tornadus for Stefan. So Stefan changing it up a little bit. Tornadus going to be able to provide some Tailwind support, as well as a Bleak Wind Storm into these two wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah, Tim makes the adjustment. Doesn't have Raging Bolt on the field. This is what we saw from that first game that never actually happened, where I think you have to have a little more of your offense out early to try to punch that first hole. But Stefan, I think, has the right things in against it. The Ogerpon and the Tornadus really don't mind fighting against these Pokemon. It's a little bit of a volatile position. Lots of damage can go either way. The Tornadus, of course, can still be faked out, does not have a Covert Cloak, but it pay some recoil damage in the process for that. But yeah, Urshifu cannot fight in this situation, has to worry about the Ogerpon on the other side and a Bleak Wind Storm possibly coming in, so instead it's just Raging Bolt into that slot to resist this Horn Leech.
Yeah, so nice defensive switch right there from Tim to be able to get that Raging Bolt in for what is essentially free here as a Bleak Wind Storm connects onto the Rillaboom, as Rillaboom will retaliate with a big Wood Hammer here, but does not get the one-hit KO on the Ogerpon. So Ogerpon hanging on with just a little bit of health as everybody will take their Grassy Terrain healing. So really great defensive switch right there from Tim to be able to get that Raging Bolt in. And again, with the leftovers and that Grassy Terrain, it will heal back up. It will be fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine. It does mean that it is in this match, right? It means that Clefairy in-game is a looming possibility once again. A lot of damage is traded. Stefan gets the Bleak Wind into Rillaboom. But the big difference is when that KO doesn't actually happen, it's easy enough for Rillaboom to try to pivot off the field here. The Ogerpon was pushed low enough in health that a Thunderclap is a real threat. Thunderclap also a threat into Tornadus, so you can't just take it for granted that a Calm Mind is what's going to happen on the other side and just continue to try to press offense into Rillaboom's partner in the same way that Game 1 happened. And so yeah, Ogerpon just flees this situation, doesn't want to take a Grassy Glide or a Thunderclap and go down. So it's Clefairy coming in and being exposed to damage. This is the kind of initial pressure that Tim needs to try to get a lead in this game.
Yep, and there's a Grassy Glide connecting into the Tornadus. Will be damaged from the... Ooh, that's not even enough to get the KO there, though. The Thunderclap not enough to get the KO as Bleak Wind Storm from... Oh, that's a big miss right there. So there's Rocky Helmet recoil on the Rillaboom that it took. Almost like it's low in health, and the Bleak Wind Storm would have KO'd, but that's an unfortunate miss right there for Stefan.
Yeah, I mean, I think a smart switch from Stefan, right? Tornadus is only still not KO'd right now because of the Friend Guard from Clefairy, giving it enough health to take that Grassy Glide and Thunderclap double up. Tim, I think, knew the damage outputs there, right? He knew that Thunderclap wasn't enough on its own, and so tried to add in that Grassy Glide. But with Clefairy on the field, just changing those damage calculations the way that you talked about, it still wasn't enough. And so Stefan got that chance for the Bleak Wind that would have gotten that crucial first KO and started to make life difficult for Tim, but it misses. That's what you're always the problem with Bleak Wind Storm. When you're trying to hit two of them over 2 turns to KO a Pokemon, your accuracy starts to look somewhat bleak. And so doesn't get the KO onto the Rillaboom, and once again it's able to just try to pivot out of this position and keep all 4 Pokemon alive, or try to go out on the offense. You don't want a Wood Hammer to land into Clefairy either. I mean, any moment could be where suddenly a ton of damage comes in. Clefairy does just follow me, make itself a little bit vulnerable for this turn.
And here Tornadus does use Bleak Wind Storm, and again Rillaboom dodges the attack. A double miss right there. Rillaboom uses Wood Hammer, though, will connect into that Clefairy, does big damage. That's the big damage that you need to lay down onto that Clefairy as Raging Bolt uses his turn to go for a Calm Mind. So big Bleak Wind Storm miss right there for Stefan, allowing this Rillaboom to stick around on the field and going for a huge chunk of damage into that Clefairy.
Yeah, I mean, that just a devastating couple of Bleak Wind Storms for Stefan, because it looked like a fairly safe play. Grassy Glide could have come in before Bleak Wind Storm into Clefairy, but wouldn't have done that much damage. You can trust that Grassy Terrain will slowly heal that off, but because of the pair of Bleak Wind Storm misses, instead it's a Wood Hammer landing into Clefairy, now it's looking a lot lower. That's definitely in, like, for instance, Surging Strike's KO range. We saw in Game 1, he was able to keep Clefairy on the field against the Urshifu without too much risk because it was healthy. It's not going to be the same this game, even with a couple more turns of Grassy terrain recovery. Clefairy will always be vulnerable to his Surging Strikes, and it starts to look a little bit more like now that boosted Raging Bolt could have a win condition in the end game.
Yeah, as long as that Clefairy gets knocked out, that Raging Bolt will be an absolute menace. Clefairy using Follow Me again this turn, does not want to allow the Tornadus to be able to take a Thunderclap as Grassy Glide connects into Clefairy, and here Tornadus connects on that Bleak Wind Storm. Will be able to get the KO on that Rillaboom, but Clefairy has paid quite the price here. Clefairy is very low in HP, so this Clefairy does not have that much staying power left as Raging Bolt content to go for yet another Calm Mind. Yeah,
and this is the problem with using the Clefairy in the early game this way, is if you're in the situation where you're down to the last couple of Pokemon, then Raging Bolt having dead turns means that it's just not doing anything. But when those dead turns are early on, it can just continue to get boosts, right? It could not have done damage that turn. Even if Tim had wanted to do damage, there was no damage to be had. But it can continue to boost and mean that when this Clefairy goes down, for instance, it's very easy to just bring in the Urshifu right now, or the Ogerpon works just as well. And now you put pressure. You can put an attack into the Clefairy slot. It either stays in to keep Tornadus safe, or it leaves and leaves Tornadus on an island by itself, having to actually fight against this Raging Bolt without either protection. Neither option is good. You have to kind of give up something now if you're Stefan because of how low Clefairy's health bar has got.
Yeah, so there are a lot of options that Tim has adjusted to be able to bring to try to chunk away at this Clefairy. The Rillaboom, the Urshifu, and this Ogerpon adjustment. Really cool to see that, you know, Tim saw, hey, this Clefairy's problem, I gotta do something. Incineroar, a Pokemon that is so good with his balance team, just not brought at all. The Intimidate, don't need it.
Yeah, recognizing that 2 dead Pokemon against Clefairy, 2 Pokemon that really have no damage output against Clefairy is just too much. That's really difficult to overcome.
So Clefairy here will protect itself, does not want to get knocked out just yet. Tornadus will use his turn to opt for a Tailwind, a little parting gift for the team behind Stefan here, as Ogerpon will use Ivy Cudgel into the Clefairy Protect, and Raging Bolt will go for a Dragon Pulse and secure the KO on the Tornadus.
Yeah, and so exactly this is where Stefan has to give something up. There was no way to continue to follow me that Dragon Pulse on that turn. Even if you would click the button, it would have been Ivy Cudgel landing the Clefairy for a KO and then Dragon Pulse landing into Tornadus. Tornadus tries to survive an extra turn by Tailwinding, which would have prevented Thunderclap damage, but just goes down to a Dragon Pulse. I think Tim making smart targeting to understand that just needs to start taking KOs. And now you look at low health Clefairy, low health Ogerpon. Landorus, that is in that situation where it would have loved to fight against Raging Bolt early on in the game, but now this is a twice boosted special defense Raging Bolt. It looks a lot more difficult for Landorus to actually find the offense, and we know, because Tim led it, that there's also still an Urshifu lurking in the back that's going to love to be up against that the Landorus on the other side. The Tailwind probably not making too much difference here. It may have shifted the speed relationships between the 2 Ogerpons. Often Ogerpon Hearthflames are trained a little bit faster than Ogerpon Wellsprings, but now because of the Tailwind on the last turn, we can trust that Stefan is faster. Clefairy may also, Clefairy a very slow Pokemon. Not impossible that it became faster than Raging Bolt after the Tailwind. But yeah, once again, Clefairy, if it follow me's to try to keep a Thunderclap away from this Ogerpon, then it should be going down to an Ivy Cudgel on the other side, because the Ogerpon Wellspring on Stefan's side just doesn't have the damage to immediately take out the Ogerpon Hearthflame on the other side.
Yeah, so Tim sacrificing those Calm Mind boosts, switches out, will send back in the Urshifu. So Urshifu will try to go up against these 2, and looks like there is going to be Terrestrialization. It is going to be the Ogerpon on Stefan's side of the field, getting that Embody aspect. Special defense boosts at such low health, probably not going to matter too much, especially if this Ogerpon on Tim's side will be going on the offensive. So let's see how this turn plays out, as Ogerpon over on Tim's side will Spiky Shield here, does not want to possibly take an Ivy Cudgel into that slot and just take big damage. The Terrestrialization could also be to make sure that the Ogerpon has enough damage output to be able to KO. And here's a Sing from Clefairy, but it misses. Urshifu dodges it. Got some earplugs in. Yeah,
Clefairy trying to go after what was the Raging Bolt, maybe hoping to be faster, or just still trade something and get Raging Bolt put to sleep so that it can't have continued damage output. The Terrestrialization from Ogerpon, trying to see if that is enough damage to just KO the Ogerpon, maybe with a critical hit it would be. But Ogerpon keeps itself safe, and Tim makes the adjustment to have 2 big attackers on the field and really put a bunch of pressure on Stefan. He has the speed advantage, but he's got a lot of damage coming back his way. There was a high cost paid for that, though. If Tim doesn't think that it's Landorus in the back, that is still an unrevealed Pokemon, still a Pokeball on the screen. And those special defense boosts don't matter as much, but with it being the Landorus, that was actually a pretty high cost to switch that out, and we'll have to see if that is a regret for Tim in the end game.
Tim will switch the Raging Bolt back in, save that Ogerpon for later on, as Clefairy perhaps one last follow me here, as Ogerpon will use Horn Leech into the Urshifu. Will be super effective damage, will heal Ogerpon back up into green health range, as now Urshifu will connect with the Surging Strikes, and yep, no more Clefairy on the field. So that Raging Bolt is breathing a sigh of relief, but we'll see if Tim is breathing a sigh of relief when he sees that Landorus is the last Pokemon in the back for Stefan.
Yeah, so that checkmate scenario from Game 1 is gone here in Game 2. Clefairy goes down to a Surging Strikes this time, and paves the way for Landorus to come on the field. In some ways, this is a strong position for Stefan. He's got the Focus Sash broken, has the speed control on his side. Ogerpon may have actually healed enough from that Horn Leech to not be vulnerable to a Thunderclap anymore either, which could make a big difference to try to be able to put an Earth Power into Raging Bolt and a Horn Leech into the Urshifu on the other side, or an Ivy Cudgel to be cover for the Ogerpon to come in, and make it a little bit easier for Stefan to press the offense. Definitely, despite losing Clefairy and losing that really easy end game that we saw from game 1, would not count Stefan out here. He's got the speed, he's got a couple of big attackers on the field, and Tim looks a little bit vulnerable here.
Yeah, it will come down to if Tim can stall out this Tailwind, just so that way not all of Stefan's Pokemon will be outspeeding Tim's Pokemon as Ogerpon uses Ivy Cudgel here. It does connect. You see the excitement on Stefan's face as it knocks out the Urshifu here. So now, how does Tim react to this after taking a Landorus Earth Pound? That's just a one-hit KO.
That's just a one-hit KO. Those special defense boosts are a thing of the past, and that's just a KO. Tim doesn't even try the Thunderclap into Ogerpon there, and so the Ivy Cudgel just goes off. The Urshifu on the other side also could have protected that turn and tried to keep itself around, but it doesn't happen. And so nothing could have gone better for Stefan than the way that turn played out. Gets the Ivy Cudgel KO, gets the Earth Power KO, and now is in prime position to get this last KO against Ogerpon and win this set.
Yeah, so Tim with just the Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon against Landorus and Ogerpon. Not a position that you want to be in, as Ogerpon will fight this out. Does connect a Wood Hammer onto the Ogerpon over on Stefan's side. Does get the KO, but again, Landorus has such great typing coverage because of its access to Sludge Bomb. Sheer Force boosted, Life Orb boosted, Sludge Bomb, but looks like it's just going to be an Earth Power into that Ogerpon slot, and that will get the KO, and Stefan Mott will make it and secure the spot in Day 2 here at the Orlando Regional Championships.
Yeah, Earth Power recovering for a possible Trisolization. Tim had never had to use it in that game. But yeah, just has so much damage left there at the end. You can see the power of Clefairy. Game 1, it has the win condition mode. But even in Game 2, it became one of those magnets of focus. Tim really had to think so much about how to deal with it. So he had to make team adjustments. Doesn't bring in Incineroar because he can't be left with 2 Pokemon. Has to prioritize getting it KO'd. That means leaving Rillaboom out to just also get knocked out, right? There are very few situations when you're playing this kind of balanced team that you just stay with the Rillaboom and go for this Wood Hammer. Go for the Grassy Glide on the next turn, knowing that Rillaboom's just going to go down. But that was because Tim had to prioritize so much finding damage onto Clefairy, and he finally gets enough damage. He gets it done, and then it's just up against Ogerpon and Landorus with the Tailwind, putting out so much damage.
A few times really allowed Tim to have opportunities to, really chip away at that Clefairy, that end game that was so important to Stefan, and, that Clefairy hung on just long enough. It really comes down to that Raging Bolt switch, right?
Yeah, I think that Raging Bolt switch was a really crucial moment. I think Tim was trying to not have to give up too much on the turn that he got rid of Clefairy, right? Or maybe it's not confident the Ogerpon would have even been able to take an Ivy Cudgel, and so it wasn't going to be that easy. If you think that Ivy Cudgel is just going to KO the Ogerpon Hearthflame, then the Clefairy is still actually playing that win condition role, because with Raging Bolt on the field next to it, it can't do any damage alongside that. If Ivy Cudgel is just going to KO Ogerpon, then you're going to lose that Pokemon, and so maybe a switch was forced, but gives up a ton in switching out that boosted Raging Bolt to find more damage on the turn that Clefairy goes down, and then pays for it. When Raging Bolt comes back out, Landorus just picks up that enormous one-hit KO onto Raging Bolt.
Yeah, so that was a battle. That was a battle. I mean, Stefan played that magnificently, just making sure that Clefairy was around to be able to provide that support. Again, Game 1, such a crucial win condition to be able to keep that Clefairy versus that Raging Bolt, just to wall that Raging Bolt. Hey, Raging Bolt, I know that you enjoy sitting there, setting up your Calm Minds and stuff, but hey, you can't Thunderclap and you can't Dragon Pulse. Now what are you going to do? And my partner Pokemon are going to start knocking out your Pokemon. Yeah,
we've seen players do it with the Fairy Terrorized Amoonguss, who can play a very similar role. If you're Rage Powdering with a Fairy Amoonguss, the same thing happens. But then you have to save your Terrestrialization for that. Clefairy allowed Stefan to use the Terrestrialization on Ogerpon and really press the offense. It was what made it so easy to get those couple of KOs that broke open Game 1 with the boosted Ivy Cudgel landing into the Rillaboom and weakening it down, and also what allowed the Ogerpon to have the offense to close out that Game 2, getting hits into the Urshifu on the other side, and also threatening the Ogerpon on the other side enough that Tim wasn't willing to just make that trade.
Yeah. So again, they're friends. They know how each other play too, right? So that must go into the mentality of how they prepared for this and how they thought about trying to go into just, hey, usually your tendency here is to not do that.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, your tendency in this situation is to typically do that. So I wonder if that had anything to do with how they played this match out.
Well, I just know that it's going to be a tricky spot as friends if Tim is constantly getting put in that Clefairy checkmate position. That's no fun to be in. To just see your Pokemon and then just see your win conditions vanish as you have no way to deal with it.
Yeah, and you know, thinking about it, like with this team that Tim piloted being such a popular team, it's got a lot of presence at any tournament that you go to. It's one of the best teams. I mean, you take 6 of the best Pokemon in usage, right? The top 6 Pokemon in usage, that's this team. That could basically be this team, right? And then you get kind of walled by Clefairy.
Yeah, I mean, when a team is that common, it has very clearly exploitable flaws, and with a Pokemon that's not that bad to begin with, Clefairy, a very strong Pokemon, it's not like you're paying a huge tax to have that matchup advantage. It makes a ton of sense. Well, let's hear from the man himself and hear about from Stefan about that match.
We'll talk later.
Thank you, Evan, or Evan's on SME. Thank you, Len and Dwee. Sorry, we were actually just talking about Dwee's Tangela pin and talking about the viability of Tangela in competitive Pokemon. That's legitimately what was actually going on over here in the lounge. But we are here with Stefan Mott.
Hi.
He has moved on to day 2 here at this after round 8. So he had a 2-0 victory over Tim Edwards, who obviously just got 2nd place at EUIC. So, but you're on a hot streak yourself, top 32 at EUIC last weekend as well. So everything's going great.
Yeah, I've had I talked about this a little bit in my stream interview at EUIC. I've had not a bad season, but a weird season. I've just been 6-3ing everything, and like it's been like they're good results. I qualified for Worlds before EUIC, but like it gets a little frustrating. Like I had a really good start to the season. I top 16 Sacramento, and it's just kind of been like very mid since then. So it's really nice to not only go 8-1 for the first time at EUIC, but also make back-to-back day 2s, which I haven't done since around this time last year. So I'm really happy, and especially against a player as amazing as Tim. It feels good to get another win.
So what do you think has been a factor to your benefit over the last couple weeks? As you say, you've had a lot of 6 and 3s, which is, you know, to the layman player, that's a great performance, but to a regional champion like yourself, obviously you hold yourself to a higher standard. How have you now performed these last 2 weekends, these last 2 events in a row, to that higher standard you hold yourself to?
Yeah, so a lot of it is a team building thing. I've been on this team for about 8 weeks or so, and when I team build, it's I have the very, very descriptive thought process of vibes on, vibes off, and there was something about this team where I wasn't doing very well with it for the first like month and a half that I used it, but I could feel that it wasn't a team issue. It was that the team is just really hard to pilot well, and I just wasn't playing it well enough. So I stuck with it. I've been on the team for about 8 or 9 weeks now, and that's really been really beneficial to me. Before, like the first half of the season, I was making like meta calls, and like they weren't bad, but you go in and if you don't have that much time to prep your calcs, to prep your lines, it can be really difficult to play on the fly, especially some of the North American events where you play a lot more random stuff, so to speak. And then more recently, I just kind of like, at the beginning of this year, I stuck with the team for about 2 months, but it was like a very volatile team, lots of inaccurate moves, and that like it had a very high ceiling. I was able to beat really good players and play super well when everything hit, but then you play 9 rounds of Swiss in a day, you're gonna miss a bunch of moves. So it's kind of nice to have a team that I've played for about 2 months. The meta hasn't shifted in a way that is bad for the team. If anything, it's gotten stronger. And I don't really have a lot of inaccurate moves. Bleakwind Storm was great up there, though.
I was gonna say, we're talking about inaccuracy, you were talking about the vibes being on. The vibes were off for Tornadus with that. I don't know if you could, obviously you have headphones on, but the crowd with the double Bleakwind miss is like, how do you handle stressful situations like that where you have to rely on inaccurate moves which are inherently unreliable?
It's really tough. I'm a bit of an emotional player, so one of the biggest things I've had to work on is like, I'm still gonna get annoyed when stuff like that happens, but you have to just not let it affect the way you play the game. You kind of like take a deep breath and go, okay, observe the board state. What happened last turn does not matter. I observe the board state. I make the play that's on the board state that we're on. after the last Bleakwind miss on the Rilla, I hesitated a little. The plays always follow me Bleakwind again. I just have to get rid of the Rilla. But I did hesitate a bit because I'm just sitting there thinking, am I really going to miss another Bleakwind? Am I going to lose this game off another Bleakwind miss? But eventually I had to go for it because it is the correct play. And when you think about it, like a couple turns before that, like the line is, I need to not miss 3 Bleakwinds in a row on the Rilla, and the chances of that happening are fairly low, so, it worked out in the end. It was okay. The Sing miss was a little sad. That was a really nice play.
Whoa. First of all, I will allow you to be upset at the Bleakwind misses because it's 70% accurate. You're like, oh, shucks, I wish that one hit. But Sing, you guys just tip your hat when Sing misses. 55%
I wasn't sad.
accurate.
I wasn't mad.
Yeah.
I was sad. Because the Urshi comes in, and I'm like, I'm not going to lie. I'm not 100% sure why he switched out the Raging Bolt there. But it goes out, the Ursh comes in, and I'm like, oh, if this Sing connects, I win the game. and then it missed, and I was a little bit sad, especially like compounded by the Bleakwind misses. But ultimately, like, Bleakwinds is a move that if you're planning on playing a Bleakwind spam line, like, you're trying to position yourself to have a lot of opportunities to click Bleakwind, so it's not like, oh, I need to hit every single Bleakwind. I need to hit 9 Bleakwinds in a row to win this game. Well, it's like, obviously, that's not going to be very reliable. But, it's like, if you only need to hit a few of them, like, it can work. If Torn hits all of them, like, it's kind of fire.
Now, I noticed in game 2, you spent a lot of those turns just using your first 3 Pokemon and saving the full health Landorus in the back. So obviously at that point, you were able to have full HP, have your HP, use it as a resource as players talk about all the time, and then get the final KO onto Ogremon Hearthflame on the other side. So when you're playing at this high of a level against another great player like Tim, how early on into a match are you saying in the back of your head, I have to conserve Landorus at full HP for the end game?
So the matchup is really interesting because it's not actually about Landorus preservation. It's about preserving Clefairy. You have to keep Clefairy alive. You're not allowed to Terra Clefairy because the Clefairy is what walls the Raging Bolt.
Right.
So you have to keep Clefairy alive, and you have to not Terra Clefairy, which is really hard against the Ogrepon Hearthflame because it's really tempting to just turn it into a fire type and click follow me. But it's about conserving Clefairy's HP while also not letting the Clefairy go down. But, like, you need to have it on the field, otherwise the partners are weak and you need the redirection. So it's a really interesting game of sort of mental calculations and, like, risk mitigation and knowing exactly how much Clefairy can take. Because it doesn't matter if the Clefairy is on full HP or 1 HP against the Raging Bolt. At the end, it's really just like, if the Clefairy is alive, you win against the Bolt. And with the Landorus, it was more just that I couldn't find, like, I needed Clefairy on the field to support its partner more so than, like, switching in the Lando would have not really given me a lot of tempo. Like, a lot of the stuff that was going into the Clefairy probably would have KO'd the Lando. Like, if I take a Surging Strikes or, like, a +3 Dragon Pulse or something, like, I'm not going to live. So the Lando was just kind of hanging out because I just couldn't really find a time to bring it in. But Clefairy did her job really well, and then we got into a bit of a read at the end there on my last turn of Tailwind in game number 2 where I threatened Substitute, which is why Tim attacked there. Like, he read Substitute and he wanted to Dragon Pulse the Substitute so that when Tailwind went down, he would be able to KO the Lando. So I had to make that read where basically I had to sacrifice the Clefairy near the end, bring in the Lando, force that read, and then get it correct.
Yeah, I think it's just always fascinating watching top players and having you explain your turns, in advance, knowing that VGC is a game that it takes so many turns at once. Like, you can't just go moment by moment. You have to really start to map out your game plan and your win conditions. And I think it's always great talking with you and hearing your insights. So before we let you get ready for your round 9 matchup, do you have any shout outs for anybody watching at home?
Yeah, really, really big shout out goes to Borgie, who's one of my good friends, one of my Clefdengo brothers, and one of the Small of Garden brothers, my main sort of building group and friend group here in Pokemon. He helped me sort of theorize lines into Tim's team once I saw the pairing and we were waiting for the stream to go up. And also a shout out as well to Montana Mott, who helped me run a lot of lines into the general archetype. It wasn't quite the same team, but I lost to Montana at Vancouver, and Montana was gracious enough to give time to me to help figure out that matchup, which, even though it wasn't quite the exact same matchup here, that kind of experience really, really helped carry over into this match.
Was it a Mott connection? He was like, I gotta help a fellow Mott out.
The first time we played was at a win-in in Vancouver. Like that, it's this is a rivalry that's destined to happen. So I did not win, but next time. As of right now, I am not the superior Mott, but next time.
Hey, we'll never know what happens here this weekend in Orlando. But again, congratulations, Stefan. We're rooting for you in round 9, and we look forward to seeing you on broadcast in day 2 tomorrow. But for now, we are going to take a break as we get prepared for our final match of the day on stream. Round 9 will be right here when we come back.